My name is Margot Hayes, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to share with you is something that forever altered the course of my life. The funeral of my husband, Ernest, was the most surreal and unsettling day I've ever known. It should have been a somber occasion, filled with remembrance and mourning. But standing by his grave, I received a text message that sent a chill through my entire body. I'm still here. That body in the casket? It's not mine. My hands trembled as I typed back, my heart pounding. Who is this? The reply came quickly, with a sense of urgency I couldn't ignore. I can't tell you who I am. But be careful. Don't trust our sons. Those words shattered me. In that instant, I knew something was wrong, deeply wrong. I looked over at Charles and Henry, my sons. They were standing by the casket, their faces unusually calm, too composed for the situation. Their tears, forced, mechanical. The hugs they gave me were colder than I could bear. In that moment, something inside me snapped. For 42 years, Ernest had been my everything, my partner, my protector, the love of my life. I met him when I was 24, in the sleepy little town of Spring Creek. We were both born on the same quiet streets, raised with modest dreams, and lived a simple life. I worked as a house cleaner to take care of my sick mother, while Ernest ran his little bicycle shop, inherited from his father. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. It wasn't always easy. I remember the first time Ernest spoke to me. I was walking to the market, wearing my faded green dress and worn-out shoes, when he stepped out of his shop. He smiled at me shyly, his hands covered in grease from working on a bike. "Good morning, Margot," he said softly. "Need me to check your bike?" Of course, I didn't own a bike, but I made up some excuse just to talk to him. That little chat sparked something in me, something that grew into long walks. Quiet dates under the old oak tree in the park, and eventually, a simple wedding full of love and hope. We were poor, but we were rich in love. The early years were tough. Ernest worked hard in his shop, from sunup to sundown, while I sewed clothes for the women in town. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof. When it rained, we'd scatter pots around the house to catch the leaks, but we never let it get us down. Our home, though small, was full of joy, laughter, and love. Then came Charles, our firstborn. The moment I held him in my arms, I thought my heart would burst from happiness. He had his father's eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Henry arrived, perfect in every way. I loved them fiercely, and I poured every ounce of my heart into raising them. Ernest was a great father. He'd take them fishing on Sundays, teach them how to fix things with their hands, and tell them bedtime stories. But as they grew older, I noticed a change. Charles, the older one, always had a drive, an ambition that didn't sit right with me at times. From a young age, he'd ask questions like, "Why do we live so simply? Why don't we have a car like everyone else?" Henry, ever the follower, always went along with his older brother's ideas. When Charles turned 18, Ernest offered him a job at the shop, but Charles turned him down with disdain. "I'm not getting my hands dirty like you, Dad," he said. "I'm going to be someone important." That comment hurt Ernest deeply, though he never showed it to me. I'd find him sitting on the porch at night, staring at the stars, a look of sadness on his face. It was clear to me that the son he had worked so hard for had no respect for the very life Ernest had built. Years passed, and Charles found success in the business world, landing a job at a real estate company in the city. Henry followed soon after. They both began making more money than Ernest and I ever dreamed of. At first, I was proud. My sons were finally breaking free of the poverty that had bound us. They had achieved what Ernest and I couldn't, but little by little, that pride turned into a quiet sorrow. Their visits grew fewer, the phone calls shorter. When they did visit, they arrived in fancy cars, dressed in expensive suits, and talked about investments and properties. I could sense the judgment in their eyes, their pity. Their shame, Mom, Charles said to me during one of their rare visits, you and Dad should really consider moving. This house is falling apart. He was right. Our house wasn't perfect, but it was the home we had built. It held every memory, every laugh, every moment we had shared. And Ernest, in his quiet wisdom, often reminded me, Margot, money has changed them. We're not enough for them anymore. At the time, I refused to believe it. I kept telling myself, they're busy. They'll come around eventually. They'll remember us. But in my heart, I knew Ernest was right. We had already lost our sons long before I lost my husband. As time went on, I could see the distance growing between us and our sons. They started to become more like strangers, their visits marked by awkward silences and empty gestures. Charles, once so eager to spend time with us, now barely had time for a cup of coffee. His focus had shifted, and Henry, always so close to his brother, followed him in everything. Even his behavior mirrored Charles's new attitudes. Like an echo of his older brother's ambitions, one of the most glaring moments came when Charles married Jasmine Albright, a woman from the city who had nothing but disdain for our way of life. I'll never forget the first time she came to our house. Charles brought her home for a visit, and from the moment she stepped out of the car, I knew she was different. She wore a red dress that looked like it cost more than everything I had ever owned combined. And her heels sank into the dirt on our porch like they didn't belong. Nice to meet you, she said with a smile so thin, it felt more like a mask than a greeting. She barely extended her hand, her fingers just brushing mine. It was a subtle thing, but it felt like a slap. During dinner, she barely touched the meal I had prepared with so much love. She prodded at her plate, cutting her meatloaf into small, dainty pieces, but not once did she take a bite. I watched, helplessly, as Charles apologized for the food, for the house, for everything that didn't meet her expectations. Next time, we'll take them to a restaurant, he whispered to her, so quietly I almost didn't hear him, but I did. Every word burned through me like a knife. Henry, for his part, had stopped even pretending to care. He remained single, but his behavior mirrored his brother's. He only came around on holidays or special occasions, and even then, it was clear he was in a hurry to leave. He'd spend more time on his phone than talking to us, always closing deals, always too busy for family. The holidays became colder, more distant. Christmases that had once been filled with laughter and warmth were now a mere formality. The gifts they brought were expensive, sure, but the thought behind them was missing. They'd spend a couple of hours with us, then leave as quickly as they could, as if it was a chore. The love we'd once shared as a family seemed to evaporate, replaced by awkwardness, distance, and a quiet sense of abandonment. Ernest and I grew old together in that house, alone but not lonely. He continued to work in his shop, though his hands grew weaker with each passing year. I sewed, though my eyesight wasn't what it used to be. We got by, never asking for help, never wanting to burden our sons. But Ernest, wise as always, would shake his head when I tried to explain their behavior away. Margot, he'd say softly, it's not just the money. They've changed. They don't need us anymore, and yet I held on to the hope that one day they would remember us the way they once loved us, the way we'd raised them, the sacrifices we made for them. But deep down, I knew that day was never coming. It wasn't until Charles bought his first big house, one of those $200,000 homes in a neighborhood where I'd never belonged at. I started to realize how far we had drifted. Henry followed suit soon after, purchasing a luxury condo that cost more than any of us could ever imagine. I should have been happy for them, proud even that they'd made something of themselves. But all I could feel was a deep sense of sorrow. When Charles suggested we sell the house and move into a retirement community, the idea felt like a slap in the face. A retirement community. A home for old people. Not a place where we'd spent years of hard work, built a family, and raised our sons. "You'd be more comfortable there, Mom," Jasmine said, her words coated in a sweet, saccharine tone that made my skin crawl. The suggestion wasn't out of care, it was a dismissal. To them, this house, this home that had been the foundation of our lives, was nothing more than an inconvenience. "A burden." "Jasmine's right, Mom," Charles added. "This place is falling apart. It's time to move on." I fought to hold back my tears. "This is our home," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "It's where we raised you both. It's where your father worked every day, where we've built everything." But Charles and Henry weren't listening. They were already making plans, looking at real estate agents, organizing meetings with contractors. The sense of urgency in their voices, how quickly they pushed for us to move, to sell, felt wrong. It was more than just about comfort. It was about control. Ernest had seen it long before I did. "Margot," he'd said one night as we sat on the porch, "they've got what they wanted. They've got the money, and now they don't need us anymore. We've become strangers to them." I couldn't accept it then, but I see it now. We had lost our sons long before Ernest's passing. Things continued to spiral. I could feel the weight of their indifference like a heavy curtain that separated us. Charles had become colder, more calculating. Henry, ever the follower, had become a mere reflection of his brother. I was no longer part of their world, just an obstacle they wanted to push aside. And then, one day, everything reached a boiling point. It started innocently enough. Charles came over, just the two of us, for what seemed like a routine visit. But there was something different about him that day, his eyes, too sharp, too focused. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless breakfasts and dinners when they were young. "Mom," he said, his voice oddly smooth, "I've been thinking a lot about your future." He paused, letting the words settle in the air before continuing. "You and Dad are getting older, and you need to start thinking about your options." I didn't understand where he was going with this, so I just nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've been looking into a retirement home for you," he said, his words slipping out too easily. "It's a really nice place, Mom. You'd be more comfortable. You'd have people around you. It's time you start thinking about your own well-being." A wave of disbelief crashed over me. The word home hung in the air like a sentence I couldn't escape from. I fought to keep my voice steady, but the words tumbled out with more emotion than I intended. "This is my home, Charles," I said, my voice breaking. "Your father and I built this house together. We raised you here, and now you want to sell it." Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression cool and distant. "It's not about the house, Mom. It's about your future. You can't keep living in the past." The words stung more than I could say. The past was the only thing that held any meaning for me. I didn't care about fancy houses or retirement communities. What I cared about was the life we had built. What I cared about was my family. But for Charles, none of that seemed to matter anymore. "We've got to be practical, Mom," he continued, his voice now laced with a forced concern. "This house is falling apart. It's not good for you, and it's not good for Dad. And what about Ernest?" I snapped, my eyes locking with his. "What do you think he would say about all of this?" Charles's eyes flickered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "Dad wanted what's best for you, Mom, and this is what's best." The conversation ended there, but something in the air had shifted. I knew now, without a doubt, that Charles was no longer the boy I had raised. He was someone else entirely, someone driven by greed, by ambition, by a need to control everything around him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, the coldness in his voice, the emptiness in his words. I had been blindsided by my own flesh and blood, and now I was starting to see the full picture. Days turned into weeks, and my son's behavior only grew more suspicious. Charles and Henry had started pressuring us to sell the house, even bringing real estate agents into the mix. They insisted it was for our own good. They said we couldn't keep living in the past. They said we needed to move on, but I couldn't, not from the house, not from the life Ernest and I had built. The tipping point came when Charles, in his ever so calculated manner, suggested we sell the house and use the proceeds to move into a better place. He even mentioned it again, casually, like he was just helping us plan for the future. But I saw through it. This wasn't about our future, it was about theirs. It was about their plans, their desires, their profits. I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. Why the sudden push to sell? Why the constant talk of money? Ernest had always said there was more to life than wealth, more to a family than just financial security. But now, it seemed, all that mattered to my sons was the money. The most chilling part came when Charles, after one of these visits, casually dropped a line that made my blood run cold. "Mom, we've been thinking. If you sell the house, you could move into a retirement community. The money from the house could help with the transition. And besides, it's not like you'll be alone. You'll have other people around you." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. It was like he was trying to smooth over what he knew was an impossible ask. A betrayal wrapped in a suggestion disguised as concern. "I don't want to move, Charles. This is my home," I said firmly, a sense of determination rising within me. "And I don't need a better place. I have everything I need right here." But Charles didn't relent. He just smiled that smile of his, the one I used to trust, and said, "Mom, you'll see. This is what's best for you. It'll all work out." That night, after he left, I sat in the kitchen with Ernest's coffee mug in front of me, the steam rising from the cup in a quiet reminder of the life we'd shared. But now, as I stared into the empty kitchen, it felt like something was slowly being ripped away from me. I wasn't just losing my husband, I was losing my sons, too. I hadn't realized it before, but I saw it now. My sons weren't the boys I had raised. They were strangers to me, and they had become so consumed by greed that they were willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted, even if it meant destroying everything I had left. It was in the weeks that followed that I began to uncover the truth. Ernest had always been meticulous. He kept detailed records of everything: his finances, his insurance policies, the shop's accounts. It was something I never paid much attention to, until now, one day, while cleaning out the old wooden desk in the study, I found a collection of papers I hadn't seen before. Among them was an updated life insurance policy, one that I didn't even know existed. Ernest had increased his coverage just 6 months ago, adding a considerable amount to the policy. Why had he done this? It seemed out of character for him. Ernest had always been frugal. He'd never been one to spend unnecessarily, and this sudden increase in insurance coverage didn't add up. But there was more. Beneath the insurance documents, I found a workers' compensation policy, a policy I knew nothing about, added just 2 months before Ernest's death. The numbers were significant enough to raise questions. I felt a growing unease in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. I was being kept in the dark, but I couldn't understand why. And as I dug deeper into the financial records, I found more unauthorized withdrawals from Ernest's account, signed documents that didn't quite match his handwriting, and a whole lot of missing answers. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Ernest had known something was wrong. He had made preparations. And now I was starting to understand why. I confronted Charles and Henry that night, demanding answers. The truth was starting to unravel, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "Why did Dad increase the insurance, Charles?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. "And why were there withdrawals from his account that we never discussed?" Charles tried to mask his guilt with a feigned look of confusion, but I saw through it. There was no remorse in his eyes, only cold calculation. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom," he said. "Maybe it was just some changes Dad wanted to make. You know how he was, but I wasn't fooled. Not anymore." And that's when I received the message that confirmed my worst fears. The truth was now painfully clear to me. My sons had been involved in something I couldn't even begin to imagine. But the final straw came when I received a message from that same mysterious number one that had sent such a chill down my spine at the funeral. The message was brief, but its implications were enough to freeze my blood. They're planning something bigger. Trust no one. Look deeper into Ernest's work and his health. At first, I thought it might have been a cruel prank, a joke played at the worst time possible. But then the pieces started falling into place. Ernest had known something was wrong, and he had taken steps to prepare for it. But what had he discovered? What did he suspect about our sons? What had they been planning? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But when I went to the shop to look through Ernest's things, I found it wasn't the explosion that had caused the tragedy, it was something much more sinister. The shop, where Ernest had worked for decades, was as clean as it had ever been. There was no sign of the supposed explosion, no traces of fire or damage that should have been there if the story were true. I searched through Ernest's desk, hoping to find something that might make sense of this madness. When I stumbled upon something that took my breath away, an envelope addressed to me. Inside was a letter written in Ernest's handwriting, the very same handwriting I had admired for years. As I read the words, a cold realization swept over me. Margot, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I don't trust Charles or Henry anymore. They're changing, and it feels like they want something from me. They've been pressuring me to increase the insurance policy, to sell the house, and there's something dark behind it all. Please don't trust them. If something happens to me, know that I love you, and I always will. Tears filled my eyes as I finished reading. Ernest had known something was wrong. He had suspected his own sons, and he had made preparations. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks, but it was only the beginning. The next day, I did what Ernest had asked me to do. I went to the police station. I needed to understand what had really happened to him, and why my sons had been acting so strangely since the accident. When I spoke to Sergeant O'Connell, the man who had known Ernest for years, the truth finally came to light. Mrs. Hayes, there's something we need to talk about, Sergeant O'Connell said quietly. I've been going over the medical reports from your husband's accident, and there's something that doesn't add up. My heart pounded in my chest as he continued. Your husband didn't die from a work accident. He didn't die from burns. He was poisoned. There were traces of methanol in his blood, enough to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Poisoned. My husband, the man I had loved for decades, had been murdered by the very people I had trusted most in this world. My own sons had done this to him. They never told you this, did they? O'Connell asked, his voice gentle but firm. They kept it quiet. The immediate family insisted on it, said you were too fragile to handle the details. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run out of the station and confront them, but I couldn't, not yet. I needed proof. I needed to understand what had led to this tragedy. After hearing the truth, everything else fell into place. The increased life insurance policy, the rushed funeral, the coldness in their eyes, it was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan. They had been preparing for this moment long before Ernest's death. And now, as I looked back, I could see how they had slowly, methodically manipulated every aspect of our lives. Charles and Henry were not just greedy, they were desperate. They had accumulated debts, and they saw Ernest as their way out. But they hadn't counted on one thing. Ernest had suspected them, and he had taken the steps to ensure that the truth would eventually come to light. The day I learned of their betrayal was the day I realized I had no choice but to confront them. I couldn't let them get away with murder. I couldn't let them destroy everything my husband had worked for. But how could I prove it? How could I stop them when they were already so far ahead of me? That's when the messages started coming in again. The mysterious number, which had seemed like a lifeline when I was in the dark, was now giving me directions. Go to Ernest's shop. Look at the papers. Talk to the police. I followed the instructions, but the deeper I dug, the more disturbing the discoveries became. I found financial records showing large withdrawals from Ernest's bank account, signatures that didn't match his handwriting, and a stack of papers detailing the insurance policy changes that had been made without my knowledge. But the most chilling discovery came when I found a letter from Ernest to a private investigator, someone he had hired weeks before his death. Ernest had suspected that his sons were planning something, but he had no idea just how far they had gone. Ernest had hired a private investigator named Stephen Callahan. He had trusted him to uncover the truth, to find out what Charles and Henry were planning. And now, with the evidence Stephen had gathered, I had everything I needed to confront my sons. I met Stephen at a small cafe, just as he had instructed. When he slid the folder across the table, my hands shook as I opened it. Inside were recordings of conversations between Charles and Henry, conversations in which they planned the murder of their own father. "No, we can't wait much longer," Charles's voice crackled through the recorder. "Dad's getting suspicious. We need to take care of this before he figures it out. The methanol will work. We just need to make sure it looks like an accident." I felt my stomach turn. The very people I had loved and raised, the ones I had sacrificed for, had conspired to take everything from me, including my husband's life. As Stephen played the recordings for me, he continued to explain. Ernest knew they were planning something, so he hired me to gather evidence. And I've got everything: photographs, recordings, financial documents. They're all here. I had to act quickly. Charles and Henry had already planned to steal everything from me. But now, with the truth in my hands, I was ready to make them pay. I left the cafe with a heavy heart, the weight of everything I had just learned settling on my chest. I could barely comprehend the betrayal that had unfolded before me. Charles and Henry, my own sons, had orchestrated the murder of their father, all for money. But what I didn't realize yet was just how deep this treachery went. Stephen Callahan had done his job well. He had gathered everything: recordings, financial statements, even photographs showing Charles buying methanol at a hardware store just days before Ernest's death. This wasn't just a crime of opportunity. This was a well-planned conspiracy designed to line their pockets at any cost. The most disturbing part of it all, the fact that they were planning to do the same to me. I couldn't breathe as I absorbed this new revelation. Charles and Henry were not only responsible for Ernest's death, but they were plotting my murder as well, all to claim the money that would otherwise be mine. The insurance, the house, everything. I took the recordings and the evidence Stephen had gathered straight to Sergeant O'Connell. When I handed him the folder, I could see the disbelief in his eyes as he reviewed the documents. "Margot, this is... I can't even begin to express how serious this is," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of concern and sorrow. "We need to act fast." I nodded, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I could already see the wheels turning in O'Connell's head as he made the necessary calls. The police were going to do everything in their power to stop Charles and Henry, but I had to stay strong. I couldn't let fear take over now. Not when the truth was finally within reach. The next day, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the police cars pull into the driveway. I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. Charles and Henry were about to be arrested, but the pain of what had happened still tore at my soul. These were my sons, the boys I had raised with love, the ones I had poured everything into. How had they become so monstrous? I had been prepared for this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the shock of seeing them in handcuffs. Sergeant O'Connell came to the door, his face grim. "Margot," he said softly, "they're in custody. They've been charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." We have enough evidence to make sure they'll be held accountable for what they did. I felt a coldness wash over me as the weight of the moment hit. I had to remind myself that this was justice. Ernest's death wasn't in vain. But it still hurt to know that the men I had loved so deeply had become the monsters that had destroyed everything we had worked for. I had to see them, though. I had to confront them face to face. I had to hear them admit what they had done. I walked to the station, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what I was about to face. Charles and Henry were sitting in a holding room, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously. As I entered, they both looked up in surprise, but there was no remorse in their eyes, only fear. "Mom." Charles started, but I interrupted him. "You did this," I said, my voice steady but filled with an anger I could barely contain. "You killed your father. You poisoned him, and now you're planning to do the same to me." For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Henry, ever the follower, tried to speak up, but his words were weak, desperate. We didn't mean for it to go this far, Mom. It just things got out of hand." We were desperate, but their excuses meant nothing to me. Nothing could justify what they had done. "You were never desperate," I said, my voice cold. "You were greedy, and now you'll pay for it." The officers moved in then, escorting them to the holding cells as they muttered under their breath. I didn't listen to their pleas. I didn't need to. I had already heard everything I needed to hear. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy with the burden of what had happened. But I knew I had done the right thing. Ernest's death would not go unpunished. The trial came swiftly after that. The courtroom was packed. People from all over town came to witness what was being called one of the most shocking cases in recent history. Reporters, neighbors, and even former co-workers of Ernest's filled the seats. When Charles and Henry walked into the courtroom in handcuffs, it was almost too much to bear. My sons, the ones I had raised, the ones I had loved, now stood accused of the most heinous crime imaginable. They were no longer the boys I remembered. They were strangers. The prosecutor presented the evidence clearly and without mercy. One by one, the recordings were played. Charles's voice, cold and calculating, filled the courtroom as he detailed how they had planned to kill their father for the insurance money. My heart shattered with every word. And then, the recording of their plan to kill me planned with the same chilling precision. I had to testify. I had to stand up there, in front of everyone, and tell them what had happened. What my sons had done. It was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said as he turned to face them, "this is not just a case of family betrayal. This is a case of cold, premeditated murder. A father was murdered by his own son's sons who cared more about money than the man who had raised them, who loved them." When it was my turn, I stood up slowly, my legs shaking beneath me. But I had to do this. For Ernest. For the truth, I trusted them, I said, my voice wavering at first but growing stronger with each word. I gave them everything. I loved them. And they destroyed everything. They murdered their father, and they were going to murder me too. All for money. I looked directly at Charles and Henry, and I saw the fear in their eyes, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The trial lasted for 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. And when the verdict came, it was swift. Guilty. The jury pronounced Charles and Henry were sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Ernest and the conspiracy to murder me. It was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring Ernest back. The days after the trial were a blur. I returned to my house, the one Ernest and I had built together. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt strangely empty. But I was stronger now. I had done what needed to be done, and I had gotten justice for Ernest. Life slowly began to return to some semblance of normal. The community supported me in ways I hadn't expected. People came by to offer their condolences, to express their shock and disbelief at what had happened. But through it all, I knew one thing: Ernest had not died in vain. His love for me, his care for our family, had led to the truth coming to light. I made a decision, one that I knew Ernest would have agreed with. I started the Ernest Hayes Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes. Using the life insurance money, I created a space where people who had been betrayed by their loved ones could find support. We provided counseling, legal assistance, and most importantly, hope. And every Sunday, I visited Ernest's grave, bringing flowers from the garden I had planted in his memory. As I sat there, I talked to him about the foundation, about the people we had helped, and about the justice we had found. I could feel him with me, in the breeze that rustled the leaves, in the sunlight that bathed the flowers. Your death wasn't in vain, my love, I would say. Your legacy lives on, and you'll always be with me. Years passed, and the pain began to fade, replaced by something more powerful: peace. Ernest had always been the heart of our family, and now, even in his death, he had led me to a strength I never knew I had. People still talk about the case. It's a story that's become part of the town's history. But for me, it's no longer about the tragedy or the betrayal. It's about the truth and how, in the end, love and justice can conquer even the deepest darkness. And as I sit on the porch, where Ernest and I used to drink coffee together, I know that I made the right choice. I stood up for the truth. I fought for justice. And in the end, I found the peace I had longed for. The weeks following the trial were both healing and surreal. The weight of the past hung over me, but there was something different now. I wasn't the broken woman who had stumbled through grief and fear anymore. I had found my strength, and I had given Ernest the justice he deserved. There were moments when I still caught myself missing him terribly, those quiet evenings on the porch. The smell of his work clothes, the sound of his footsteps on the old wooden floors. But slowly, I learned to live in a way that honored him. He had given me so much, and now I had to continue living. For both of us, the foundation had grown more than I could have ever imagined. It had become a beacon of hope for families suffering from betrayal and loss, victims of the very kind of evil I had endured. We helped people get their voices heard, provided them with resources, and offered legal aid to those who needed it most. It was something Ernest would have been proud of. It was the legacy I promised him I would carry forward. And with every letter I received from people whose lives had been changed, I knew I was fulfilling that promise. The neighbors, the old friends from the shop, even strangers, all came forward with support, expressing gratitude for the strength I'd shown. They shared their own stories of family pain, their own betrayals, and how they had watched my journey with a sense of awe. They admired my courage. But the truth was, it wasn't courage that got me through, it was love. The love Ernest and I shared, and the love I now poured into the work I was doing for others. And then there were the quiet moments. The ones where I sat alone in the garden I had created from the shop Ernest had built. The garden, full of his favorite flowers: roses, daisies, sunflowers, was blooming like our love had once done. It had taken root in the soil, just like our memories had taken root in my heart. Every week, I visited his grave, bringing him fresh flowers and telling him all the things I wished he could still hear. But as time passed, the visits became more peaceful. The pain wasn't gone, but it was different now, softer, more manageable. I could smile again. I could find joy in the little things, like the sunlight filtering through the trees or the sound of birds chirping on the porch. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, I received an unexpected letter. The handwriting on the envelope looked strangely familiar. It was from Charles. My first instinct was to throw it away, to never read another word from him again. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the silence between us, the unfinished chapter of my relationship with him. Maybe it was the need for closure. With trembling hands, I opened the letter. "Mom," it began, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What we did was unforgivable, and I don't expect you to understand. But I need you to know that I regret everything. The lies, the deceit, the way we destroyed our family, all of it. I know I can never undo what I've done, and I can never make up for the pain I've caused you. But please know that I'm sorry. I wish I could go back and change everything. I wish I had been the son you raised, the son who loved you. But I wasn't, and now I'm paying the price. Henry's not doing well. He's been in and out of psychiatric care, and I can't imagine what he's going through. I just wanted you to know that before everything ends, I wanted to tell you how deeply sorry I am for what I've done. I hope that someday, somehow, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I don't expect it, but I just wanted to tell you. I owe you that much. Please take care of yourself. I know I can never undo the damage I've done, but I will always regret it, with all my sorrow. Charles. The letter dropped from my hands. Part of me wanted to scream, to tear it apart, but another part of me, one that had been buried under years of grief, wanted to cry. Regret didn't change what had happened. It didn't bring Ernest back. It didn't undo the pain they had caused. I didn't know how to feel. A part of me, the mother in me, wanted to forgive him. Wanted to believe that, somewhere deep down, the son I had raised was still in there. But the truth was, I couldn't forgive him, not yet, and maybe never. What he and Henry had done was unforgivable, and no amount of regret could change that. Still, I held on to the letter, not as a sign of forgiveness, but as a reminder of everything I had lost and everything I had fought for. I had fought for Ernest's memory. I had fought for justice. And most importantly, I had fought for the truth. It's been 5 years since the trial, 5 years since I first received that chilling message by my husband's grave. I've had time to heal, time to rebuild my life, and time to reflect on the long road I've traveled. I'm not the woman I once was. The grief that consumed me has lessened, and in its place, I've found a deeper understanding of myself. I've learned that love is not about perfection, it's about loyalty, sacrifice, and trust. Ernest taught me that, and now I carry that lesson forward, not just in my work with the foundation, but in every aspect of my life. I've also learned that family isn't always about blood. The people who truly care for you, who stand by you in your darkest hours, are the ones who become your family. Stephen Callahan. The investigator who helped me get justice for Ernest has become a dear friend. He's visited me regularly, sharing stories about his other cases, making sure I'm doing okay. Some days, when the sun is setting and the house is quiet, I can almost feel Ernest beside me. I talk to him, just as I always have. I tell him about the foundation, about the lives we've touched, about the justice we fought for. And I know, deep down, he's proud of me. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting what happened and using that pain to fuel something greater. The foundation is growing. We're helping more people every year, and I know that Ernest's spirit lives on in the work we do. The neighbors still ask if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children. They were the boys who once ran through the yard, full of laughter and life. But the men they became are not the sons I raised. They chose their path. And now they must live with the consequences. As for me, I've found peace, not in the absence of pain, but in the acceptance of it. Ernest's death has been the hardest thing I've ever endured, but it has also shown me what I'm capable of. It has shown me that even in the darkest times, there is light, and that light will always guide me forward. It's strange, in a way. 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined where I'd be today. My life has changed in ways I could never have predicted. But I've come to understand something important. No matter what happens, no matter how much betrayal or grief we face, we have the power to choose how we move forward. And I've chosen to move forward with strength, with love, and with justice. Margot stood by the window, looking out at the garden. The flowers Ernest had once tended to had grown wild, but they were still beautiful, alive, just like the new sense of purpose inside her. She had spent years grieving, years wrestling with her own heartbreak and betrayal, But now, for the first time in months, there was a sense of peace. The foundation was thriving, and every day she received letters from families whose lives had been touched by her story. Families who had found justice and hope in the wake of tragedy. As she sat down at her small kitchen table, Margot felt a sense of pride. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. She had made Ernest proud, and she had found the strength to do it alone. With every new case the foundation took on, Margot's resolve grew stronger. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She was a voice for the silenced, a beacon of hope for those suffering from family betrayal. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up, knowing who it was. It was Stephen. As always, his voice brought her comfort. He had become more than just a friend. He was a reminder that there were still good people in the world, people who cared, people who would stand by you no matter what. "Margot, how's everything?" Stephen asked, his voice warm, but there was a trace of concern in it. "It's going well. The foundation's growing. We're getting more and more people reaching out for help. It's hard work, but I feel like I'm finally doing something meaningful again," Margot said, a small smile forming on her face. Stephen paused before replying, "I'm proud of you. You've come so far, and you're not just helping others, you're healing yourself too." It was a warm afternoon when the doorbell rang. Margot wasn't expecting anyone. She had just finished gardening and was in her usual post-work quiet, enjoying a cup of tea on the porch. When she opened the door, she was taken aback by who stood before her. A woman, slightly older than Margot, stood in front of her, holding a large envelope. Her face was worn, tired, but there was something familiar about her. She looked like she had been through a lot. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and she seemed hesitant to speak. "Can I help you?" Margot asked, her voice gentle but cautious. The woman nodded slowly. I'm Rebecca Hayes. I'm Charles and Henry's aunt. I heard about everything that happened. I need to speak to you." Margot's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from Rebecca since before the trial. She stepped aside to let her in, though her mind raced with questions. What could she want now? Rebecca walked in slowly, glancing around the house with a look of nostalgia mixed with sorrow. "This place used to be filled with life," she said softly, almost to herself. "I never thought it would come to this." Margot took a deep breath. "Why are you here, Rebecca? After everything, why come now?" Rebecca met her eyes. "I know I wasn't there for you when you needed support, but I've spent the last few months thinking about everything, about what happened. And I think there's something more to the story. Something I need to tell you." The tension in the room was palpable as Rebecca sat across from Margot at the kitchen table. The large envelope she had brought with her lay between them. Rebecca's hands trembled as she pushed it toward Margot. "What is this?" Margot asked, her heart racing with a mix of dread and curiosity. The last few years had been filled with so many shocking revelations that she wasn't sure she could handle another. Rebecca sighed deeply, her face filled with regret. "It's a letter from your husband, Ernest. It was meant to be given to you after everything had settled. But I couldn't bear to keep it from you any longer. I believe he knew something we didn't." Margot's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside, she found a letter written in Ernest's familiar handwriting. Her breath caught in her throat as she began to read. "My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. I need you to know the truth, the things I couldn't say aloud. Charles and Henry's involvement in my accident. It was no accident at all. They didn't just want money. They were trying to erase me from their lives completely. But there's something even darker behind their motives. I know the truth, and I can't let them destroy you too. You must be strong. The foundation is your strength, and with it, you will uncover everything you need to know." Margot's hands were shaking as she finished reading the letter. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Ernest had known. He had known everything about the betrayal, about the danger that lurked beneath the surface. The revelation hit her like a cold wave, but also, strangely, gave her a sense of empowerment. The phone rang, and Margot felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced at the caller ID. It was an unknown number. Her heart raced as she picked it up. Margot Hayes. A voice asked on the other end, low and urgent. "Yes, who is this?" She asked, her voice steady, but her mind racing. "It's Stephen Callahan. I need to talk to you right now. There's something happening. Something big." His voice was filled with alarm. Margot felt her chest tighten. "What's going on, Stephen? What do you mean?" "It's about Charles and Henry. They've been involved in something much darker than we ever realized. The investigation we've been doing, it's about to take a terrifying turn. You need to be careful, Margot. They're not finished with you yet." Margot's mind raced as she hung up the phone with Stephen. What could he possibly mean? What darker turn could the investigation have taken? She walked to the study, where the documents on the Foundation's latest cases were scattered on the desk. She had been so focused on helping others that she had almost forgotten the danger still lurking in her own life. But now, with Ernest's letter in hand, a new layer of suspicion was growing. She had trusted her sons, but what if everything she thought she knew about them was a lie? She glanced at the envelope from Rebecca, then at the letter from Ernest. The walls around her began to close in, and she knew one thing for sure. The truth was out there, and she had to find it. It was late in the evening when Margot received an unexpected visitor. The knock at the door was soft but insistent. When she opened it, she was met by a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. "Are you Margot Hayes?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yes, who are you?" she asked, her guard instantly going up. The man stepped forward, a glint of urgency in his eyes. "I'm here to warn you. You're in danger. Your sons, they're not done with you yet. You need to get out, now." Margot stared at the man, her mind spinning. Everything she had thought was behind her, her grief, her fight for justice was suddenly at risk again. But she was stronger now, more prepared than before. She wasn't about to let anyone take away the life she had built, especially not her own flesh and blood. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice steady despite the fear swirling inside her. The man hesitated, then spoke with a hint of fear. "I'm someone who's been watching over you, Margot. The people behind your sons are much bigger than we thought. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Margot sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the letter from Ernest. The words were sinking in deeper, unraveling everything she thought she knew about her life, her sons, and her past. She glanced up at the man who had appeared at her door, his eyes watching her carefully. "What do you mean they're not finished with me?" Margot asked, her voice tinged with fear. The man leaned forward, speaking in a hushed tone. "The investigation. It's not just about money, Margot. There are people in this town who will stop at nothing to protect Charles and Henry, and they have allies, dangerous ones who won't let you stand in their way. I've seen the connections. Your sons are pawns in something bigger, and they don't even know it. But you need to get out of here. They're coming for you." Margot's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know if it was the gravity of the words or the realization that her life was about to change forever. This wasn't just about family betrayal anymore. This was about her life being at risk. It was no longer just about survival, it was about protection. Margot sat still, her mind racing with the weight of the man's words. She had spent so many years living for others, raising her children, and fighting for a better life for her family. Now, it seemed as though all of that was slipping away, replaced by a darker, more dangerous reality, her hand still clutching the letter from Ernest. She felt a sudden surge of determination rise inside her. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to cower. Not after everything she had gone through. Not when she had built something so important. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice firm. The man's eyes widened in surprise. Margot, you don't understand. You can't just ignore this. If they find you, I know what I'm doing, Margot interrupted. I've lost enough already. I'm going to see this through. I'm going to protect the foundation and make sure that the truth gets out, no matter what it costs. I can't keep running from my own life. The man studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But don't say I didn't warn you. If you're staying, you'll need all the help you can get. Margaret's decision to stand her ground marked the beginning of an unexpected partnership. The man, who had introduced himself as Michael, a former investigator who had worked with law enforcement, agreed to stay and help her. Together, they began digging into Charles and Henry's connections, uncovering a tangled web of corruption, manipulation, and deceit that had stretched far beyond what Margot could have imagined. As the days passed, Margaret's home, once a place of solitude and quiet reflection, became a hub of activity. Michael brought in his own resources, contacts, and knowledge, and soon they were putting together pieces of the puzzle. The foundation of truth, of justice, was beginning to take shape, but there was something else. Margot couldn't ignore the growing fear that this wasn't just about her sons anymore. The more she learned, the more she realized that Charles and Henry had become pawns in a much larger game. And the stakes were higher than anyone could have anticipated. One night, as she sat with Michael, reviewing the latest information, a cold realization hit her. This isn't just about betrayal, Margot said, her voice low with dread. This is something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. Michael looked at her with a hard, focused expression. We're getting closer, Margot. But we need to be careful. The people we're dealing with won't stop at anything. It happened one rainy evening. Margot received a phone call she wasn't expecting. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost soothing, but there was a hidden threat behind the calm words. Margot Hayes, the voice said. I've been following your little investigation. It's cute that you think you're uncovering something, but you're in way over your head. I suggest you stop while you still can. The truth is dangerous, and you don't want to know how deep it goes. Margaret's blood ran cold. It was clear this wasn't just a warning. It was a threat, a very real one. But she wasn't going to back down. Her resolve had been hardening with every passing day. Every new detail she uncovered about the people her sons were entangled with. I'm not afraid of you, Margot said, her voice steady despite the fear tightening in her chest. I've already lost everything. You can't take that from me anymore. There was a long pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke again, this time with a cold laugh. We'll see about that, Margot. You don't know who you're dealing with. Margot felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as she hung up the phone. It was becoming clear that the closer she got to the truth, the more danger she was in. But she couldn't stop now. Too many lives depended on her, on the foundation she had built in Ernest's memory, on the people who had reached out to her for help. Later that night, Margot and Michael were going through the last of the documents when they heard a faint noise outside. Margaret's instincts kicked in. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Michael by the arm and pulled him towards the back door. They're here, she whispered urgently. We have to move now. They slipped out the back, just as headlights flashed through the windows. Margaret's heart pounded as they crept into the darkness of the backyard. They had to escape before it was too late. Michael led the way, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. As they moved through the shadows, Margaret's thoughts raced. What had she gotten herself into? But there was no turning back now. They had crossed a line, and the forces they were up against were not just trying to protect a secret, they were willing to kill for it. The next few days were a blur of moving in and out of shadows, staying one step ahead of the people who were determined to silence Margot. The threat was clear. They would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But the closer Margot got to the truth, the stronger she felt. Eventually, it came to a head. A final confrontation with Charles and Henry. It wasn't a dramatic showdown, but a quiet, chilling meeting in the heart of town, where Margot confronted her sons for the last time. Charles and Henry were both present, their expressions hard and cold, completely unlike the boys Margot had once raised. The past years had stripped them of any remnants of the family she had loved. The lies, the greed, had eaten them alive. "I know what you did," Margot said quietly, her voice steady despite the torrent of emotions swirling within her. "And I know you've been working with people far worse than you can even imagine. You thought you could get away with it. But the truth is out. And I'm not backing down," Charles sneered at her, his eyes glinting with resentment. "You should have stayed quiet, Mom. This didn't have to happen. You were just in the way. You always have been." Henry, however, seemed to falter. His expression cracked for a moment, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But it was too late. Margot had seen enough. She had already won. The truth was her weapon, and with it she would bring justice, no matter the cost. Margot stood in front of the courthouse, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and anxiety. The long and painful journey had come to an end, but she could not shake the feeling of uncertainty that still lingered in the air. It had been a grueling year of revelations, betrayals, and painful truths. But now, after everything, it was time for justice to be served. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow across the courtyard. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, everything felt still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The crowd was slowly gathering, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. This wasn't just any trial. It was a turning point, a culmination of years of pain, lies, and unresolved anger. Today, Margot would finally face the consequences of the actions that had shattered her family. But she wasn't alone. She had built something in the wake of the destruction, something stronger than the betrayal she had suffered, the foundation in Ernest's name, the lives she had touched, the justice she had fought for, and for that she was no longer afraid. The trial had been intense. The courtroom had been filled with tension as Margot's lawyer presented the irrefutable evidence that had taken months to uncover. The recordings, the financial records, and the testimony from Michael, who had been instrumental in helping Margot piece together the truth, had all painted a damning picture of Charles and Henry's involvement in not just Ernest's death, but in a web of criminal activities far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. But the most striking moment came when Margot herself took the stand. Her hands had trembled at first, but as she spoke, a calmness washed over her. She had lived through hell and come out on the other side. The truth had been buried for so long, and now it was time to let it out, no matter how much it hurt. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Margot began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent my entire life loving my children. I raised them with the best of intentions, gave them everything I had. But I never imagined that the very people I trusted the most would betray me so completely. They not only betrayed me, they betrayed the memory of their father, the man who worked so hard to provide for them, to give them a better life than we had." She paused, taking a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room. "Charles and Henry, my sons, chose money over family. They chose greed over love. And because of that choice, they took away the most important person in my life. But the truth doesn't change just because you want it to. The truth is out there, and today you will hear it. Today, my husband will finally have the justice he deserves." The room fell silent as the weight of her words hung in the air. Margot felt a sense of peace wash over her as she relived the pain of the last year, how she had fought not just for justice, but for her own peace of mind. She had not been the perfect mother, the perfect wife, but she had loved deeply, and she had always believed in the good in people. Now she was standing up for what was right, for the memory of Ernest, for the future she was determined to build in his honor. As the trial continued, the defense for Charles and Henry was weak. They tried to paint Margot as a grieving widow grasping at straws, desperate to find someone to blame. But every piece of evidence, every confession, every financial record, every testimony showed the depths of their betrayal. They had plotted not just Ernest's death, but the destruction of everything Margot had worked so hard to build. When the jury finally deliberated, Margot sat in the courtroom, her heart in her throat. She had been through too much to let herself hope, but deep down, she knew the truth was on her side. She had fought, she had endured, and now it was time for the final reckoning. The jury returned after hours of deliberation. The foreman stood, and with a clear voice, he announced the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendants Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Ernest Hayes. We also find them guilty of conspiracy to commit murder against Margot Hayes. We recommend the maximum sentence. Margot's heart soared, a rush of relief flooding through her. The truth had won. The truth had set her free. But it wasn't just the verdict that brought her peace, it was the knowledge that, for the first time in a long while, she could look at herself in the mirror and know that she had done the right thing. She had fought for justice. She had fought for her husband's memory. And she had done it for herself. After the trial, Margot returned home to the place that had once been filled with memories of betrayal and heartbreak. The house still stood, a symbol of the years she had spent with Ernest. But now it was a different place, one where she had found closure. The foundation was thriving, and the impact of Ernest's legacy was spreading. Helping families who had suffered similar fates, the letters kept coming. Each one a testament to the lives she had touched, to the families who had found healing through her strength and determination. She had not just honored Ernest's memory. She had built something meaningful from the wreckage of her past. She was making a difference, just as Ernest had always hoped. One day, as Margot sat on the porch, sipping her tea and watching the sunset, Michael came to visit. He had become more than just a friend. He had become her confidant, her ally in this journey toward healing. "How are you doing?" Michael asked, sitting beside her. Margot smiled softly. "Better than I ever thought I would. I'm not sure what comes next, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe again." They sat in silence for a while. The air filled with the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. The world seemed quieter now, softer, as if it too was taking a moment to breathe. The years would pass, but Margot would always carry the lessons she had learned from her pain. She had learned that no matter how deep the betrayal, the truth would always find a way to emerge. And when it did, it would bring the light of justice with it. Her life had not turned out as she had expected, but in the end, it had been hers to reclaim. Margot Hayes had been broken, but she was no longer afraid of the world. She had survived it, and now, with the truth as her guide, she would live for herself, for Ernest, and for all the families whose lives she had touched.